Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be ranking every single new movie that I saw in the month of January. For the most part, I think January was a very interesting month for movies because for the most part, every single movie I saw was like, okay, not great, not good, except for the one that I have in my number one spot. So I am actually really excited to get into these, but at the same time, this was a really hard ranking to make because like I said, I thought all of these movies were all right. So I'm probably not going to talk about them as much as I typically would. And before I get into my ranking, I do want to go ahead and say the movies that came out in January that I missed. The Brutalist, Nickel Boys, some of the Oscar-nominated movies that I believe came out this month. I have not had a chance to see. All of these movies are not playing in the theaters near me, so I haven't seen them. And then The Better Man, the Robbie Williams biopic that came out this year. I have not had a chance to see it, but that one was one I kind of wanted to see. But that being said, I did see 7 of the new movies that came out this month. Let's go ahead and dive into them, shall we? Alrighty, so coming in dead last place, we have the movie You're Cordially Invited. This movie was a very interesting comedy movie, but I think at the end of the day, what really makes this movie not work for me is it's 2 hours long, and it has absolutely no business being that long. I love Will Ferrell, and I think that him and Reese Witherspoon had a very fun energy in this movie, and I really liked a lot of the stuff that they were doing here, but at the same time, like I said, this movie is 2 hours long. It's a very simple premise that has been done time and time again. It feels so repetitive, and it feels so redundant. Like, it feels like something we have definitely seen before, and if you've watched any comedy that revolves around multiple people having a wedding, you've practically seen this movie, and they don't do a lot to really make it stick out. They don't do a lot to make it very interesting. A lot of the comedic aspects in the first half of this movie just come from, these two people being very competitive and being back and forth, and then, some of the young characters being portrayed as being loud and obnoxious and over the top, and that's funny because that's how young people are. And so for the most part, the comedy just didn't really work for me in this movie, and I think that there's a lot of bits throughout this movie that were pretty decent, but because it was 2 hours long, I couldn't get on board with it. It couldn't keep my attention the entire time. I was not that big of a fan of it. Alrighty, and coming in 6th place, not a great month for streaming movies. I got the movie Back in Action. For the most part, I actually did enjoy this movie more than a lot of the stereotypical Netflix little action movies that they have where they take 2 big name actors and they just throw them in a movie where they do random action stuff together. But this one kind of struggles with a lot of the same problems as You're Cordially Invited, where this is so repetitive. Everything that happens in this movie has basically been done before. It's basically Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but not as interesting. And for the most part, all of the cool action sequences, like I said, feel like they've been done before. Like, there's some cool action sequences where they're at a gas station and they're using, the gas pump and lighters to, you make it basically a homemade flamethrower. And there's stuff like that where it's like, yeah, this is kind of cool. There's some side characters that are kind of entertaining. The kids, for the most part, do an interesting job of making this movie feel a little different. But overall, it's so copy and paste and unoriginal. And I really wanted to enjoy this movie more than I did. And it's very base level. Like I said, it's okay. It's not great. Coming in 5th place, we have an animated movie that I really wanted to like more. The movie Dogman. This movie is based off of a series of graphic novels written by the same guy who wrote all of the Captain Underpants comic books. And back when I was younger, those were some of my favorite books of all time. So I really was hoping that I would go into this one and I would really enjoy it. And for the most part, I like a lot of the comedy. I think that there are some aspects of the story that they obviously could have spent more time with. And I think that one of my biggest takeaways from this movie on why I didn't like it is this movie feels like one of the first movies I've ever seen where it actually is aimed at making a movie more TikTokified. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of sequences in this movie where it's here's 45 seconds, and then we jump to the next character. Here's 45 seconds. Okay, now we jump to the next character. There's 7 montages in this movie. They introduce a bunch of new characters constantly, and a lot of the times they don't give some of the cooler premises times to breathe, which does really bother me. There's a villain here named Petey the Cat, and he does some cool, interesting things. He makes some interesting inventions, and because we're constantly montaging through everything, there's a lot of stuff that I'm like, this could have been a really cool 2-minute long, 3-minute long action sequence, and instead they make it 10 seconds, and then it's woo, the problem's solved now, and that for me just does not really work very well. It does have a lot of comedic moments that I do kind of enjoy. I think that Pete Davidson does a really good job with the voice work here, and they do have a lot of moments that are a lot more sentimental than I was expecting this movie to have, but overall, just because this movie feels so fast-paced, it does kind of take away from the overall enjoyment of this movie for me. There's just a lot of times where I wanted to be able to enjoy this sequence without knowing that, okay, 10 seconds from now it's going to be something completely different and there's going to be a completely different group of characters, and it just felt like too much was going on in this movie in my opinion. Alrighty, and coming in 4th place, we have an animated movie that I enjoyed more than I was expecting to. Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. I'm going to be totally honest, and this might be a wild take, and some people might really disagree with me for saying this. I've never been a fan of Wallace and Gromit. Something about the way that they looked has just always made me uncomfortable. As a kid, I think I literally was afraid of these guys, and there's just a lot of elements of Wallace and Gromit that I've never really been a fan of. I think that now that I'm older, I can respect the artistry of it a lot more. I think that the animation style is actually really beautiful, and the fact that it is like hand done, like clay figures and stuff like that, that is awesome. That is really cool, and I think that the attention to detail for this entire film to be made is very, very captivating, and they do an incredible job with it. But I think that overall, I've just never really liked this sense of humor. I think that all of the characters have insanely annoying voices, and this one has a similar problem that I had with the Dogman movie, where there's a lot of sequences that I feel like they cut it short a little bit quicker, and there's never really enough time to breathe, which is interesting to me because you would think with how like difficult it is to make every individual sequence that they have to make, that they would spend, you know, times where they can slowing things down. But that being said, I still really enjoyed this movie. I think that the comedy in it is really great. I like the fact that this movie kind of touches on some really adult topics, like the dangers of AI is something that is very heavily addressed in this, and they do a really good job of showcasing why the over-reliance on technology is never a good thing. And then on top of that, they also have stuff kind of going against the justice system, and how like there's a lot of fraudulent stuff in the justice system with the whole, okay, well, we think that this guy's the guy who did this illegal thing, so we're just going to pin this on him, and then we'll find the evidence later. And I think that that's interesting that they're making commentaries on this for what appears to be, at face value, just a random silly little family movie. So overall, I did really enjoy this movie, and I like that it had more to offer than movies like Dogman that I was comparing it to. In third place, we have the movie One of Them Days. For the most part, I'm not a big fan of comedies. I think that I always have a really hard time getting into a movie where the whole premise is just, hey, look at this thing, isn't it funny? Because comedy is a very subjective thing, and I think that when you make a movie that the main goal is to be comedy, it feels like it's just shoving comedy down your throat. And for the most part, this one actually did a really good job of having a story that was interesting enough that I'm like, okay, I'm here for the story, and then adding in comedy afterwards. This one doesn't feel like a lot of comedies nowadays where they're like, okay, we have this list of like 25 jokes, and we're gonna have this movie, instead of it being plot driven, it's joke driven. So instead of that, that's, you know, okay, this character has this thing going on, and this is what we're trying to get from point A to point B to point C. Instead, they have, okay, well, we want to make this joke. Okay, how are we going to make this joke? How are they going to get into a situation where they're going to make this joke? And then they go from there, and it's very, like, discombobulated. This movie doesn't have that problem at all. You can tell that they were like, okay, we're going to make this movie take place in a day. We're going to have them, you know, starting off early in the morning with a waitress who works third shift or whatever. She gets off her shift, and they're getting ready to, you know, have a very fun and exciting day. It's the first of the month, so rent is due, and that creates a driving force for them to pay their rent. And there's just a bunch of fun hijinks in this movie. And I really like the fact that this movie feels like a road trip movie, all within the confines of like the one city they're in the entire time. I like the editing decisions that they decided to do with this movie, because there's a lot of moments that feel very cartoony, and I love that. And I think that both Keke Palmer and SZA had some fun chemistry in this, and they had a lot of fun acting, because there's a lot of moments where, like, in comedies, you need actors who, they're making this scene that is absolutely ridiculous, that's going to be super funny, but they can't seem like they know what they're doing is funny. They have to take it very seriously, and it works well. I overall really, really enjoyed this movie. Coming in second place, I might be in a minority here. I really, really enjoyed the movie Wolfman. I think that the overall horror elements of this film worked relatively well. I liked the fact that we had practical effects. I mean, the Wolfman is 100% makeup and VFX style, and they do some cool stuff with like the hair and stuff like that. This is a great movie. This is the kind of movie we should be supporting. They're over here making a low-budget horror movie and actually doing a lot to introduce cool characters that are interesting, that we have this fun time with. And I think that for the most part, they do a good job creating a family dynamic. I do hate the thing that a lot of horror movies are doing right now, which is, okay, we got an actor and an actress who have no chemistry whatsoever. Okay, well, they're going through a rough time in their marriage. Okay, they're getting a divorce and stuff like that. And it's like, can we please for once get a horror movie where the wife and the husband actually love each other, because that would make this a little bit better. But that being said, I like the fact that this movie, for the most part, feels like every single scene that's in it is necessary. One of my biggest complaints with a lot of horror movies is that short films that are horror movies are significantly better than full-length movies that are horror movies. But this one, they do a really good job of drawing out suspense. The transformation of him going from being, you know, this father who's fully human and is able to interact with everything that's going on, to slowly losing his sense of reality, no longer being able to understand his wife and child. The last thing this man ever heard was his daughter saying that he loves him. And that is depressing. That is awesome. And I really just like the fact that they really dove into the fact that they wanted this to be a story of like, what if you were in these people's footsteps? This is somebody you love and they're turning into a werewolf. How would you react? And I like the fact that it's a lot more emotional. I like the fact that it's very story driven and it's not just like horror for horror's sake. They do a good job of actually painting a question with it, which is, what would you do if you were in these people's footsteps? I liked this movie. I had a good time with it. I think the visuals and everything looked fantastic. I liked that this movie was actually really dark. A lot of horror movies that take place at night will have characters turning on lights in instances where why the hell would they turn a light on? It doesn't make sense. So I really enjoyed this movie. And maybe it's for a lot of nitpicky reasons, but I had a good time with it. And like I said, I don't think this movie is great. Like, I think that this movie is just good. I just think that the majority of movies that came out in January weren't as good as it. But in first place, we have a movie that was absolutely incredible, the movie Companion. I'm not going to get super far into it because I think that this is a movie that could very easily be ruined via spoilers, but this movie is absolutely incredible. I think that the way that they kind of make a commentary on, you know, roles when it comes to like specific gender roles and stuff like that. I like the fact that this is a movie that kind of situates on toxic love and the toxicity of feeling like you're codependent on somebody. Like the fact that Sophie Thatcher's character, in a way, is so in love with Jack Quaid's character that she feels like she needs to do everything for him. She needs to be there for him and all these different things is very interesting. And I like the fact that they dive very far into some sci-fi elements in this movie. Like I said, I'm not going to get too far into it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. But overall, this movie is incredible. I think that they do a lot of very interesting stuff. The horror elements are interesting. The gore is fantastic. I think that the comedy in this movie is actually absolutely hilarious. They set up some rules with the sci-fi elements of this film that leads to incredibly funny moments afterwards, which I really, really had a good time with. And just overall, I loved the energy of this movie. This movie kind of feels like Barbie if it was written by a guy that's a little more sick and perverse and just kind of does a good job of having that metaphor of how some men nowadays treat women like they're objects. And then they kind of flip that a little bit by making Sophie Thatcher's character, spoiler alert, an actual object. That was awesome. That was really cool. And I like the fact that overall, one of the main themes of this movie actually incidentally is the golden rule of treat people how you want to be treated. It's always important to treat people with kindness and to treat people well because the people who treat people well end up not dying in this movie, which I think is great. But yeah, that being said, that was it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and checking it out. I love and appreciate you guys so much for watching. And if you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bow, bow, bow.